And now to the gentleman on my right, our guest speaker today, Lieutenant General Paul Ostrowski. I just want to tell you, my first boss ever was named Ray Ostrowski. That's why I like you so much.
How about that?
General Ostrowski is the Principal Military Deputy to the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. He is also the Director of the Army Acquisition Corps. He has 34 years of service with experience in acquisition and operational assignments, including joint assignments. He served as a legislative fellow, as PEO soldier, PEO for special programs at U.S. SOCOM, and with the Rapid Equipping Force, both here in D.C. and in Iraq during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Paul, thanks very much for joining us for breakfast and for a discussion on current and future force modernization.
It's great to be here. I really appreciate it.
Okay. I wanted to begin with a compliment to you and your team. I just yesterday saw the summer 2019 edition of Army AULT magazine, and it is replete with great articles about data from the foxhole to the Pentagon. And I think it really showcases some of the great work that you and your team are doing in this domain. While our audience thinks about what they'd like to ask you, I'm going to prime the pump with a few questions to help set the stage.
Please be gentle.
The topics relate to the three key areas of readiness, modernization, and reform. And a question from each of these while you all think of what you want to ask General Ostrowski. So let's start with readiness because it's number one. While the Army's invested in modernization in recent years through upgrades to existing platforms and some specific new requirements for operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, such as the mine-resistant ambush-protected systems, the lack of major New START programs to maintain overmatch against potential enemies causes great concern. How has nearly 2 decades of deferred modernization and major acquisition programs impacted readiness?
Well, I believe that, quite frankly, the fact that we have not been able to modernize has been detrimental across the board, and especially with respect to being able to maintain overmatch. Now, what we've done is, again, there's 3 dials out there for everyone, and just to put everybody in perspective here. The first dial is how big do you want your Army to be? And that's your force structure, and that's a must-pay bill. Your second dial is how ready do you want your force to be? And that's the readiness piece, and that's the Chief and the Secretary's number 1 priority, and it remains that way. And then there's a third dial, how modern do you want your Army to be in terms of modernization? And so what happened is that based on budget cuts and sequestration and all the rest of the story in being in a war for the last almost 18 years now, we've been focusing on the readiness piece. And the detriment to that is the fact that we've done incremental upgrades to current systems as opposed to moving forward with modernization programs to get after the future fight. And anytime you put yourself in that position, there's risk, because what happens is that adversaries, or potential adversaries, certainly competitors, that are out there have the ability to catch up with you in terms of modernization because they are not spending the money on those particular things that we have had to spend ours on. And because of that, we found ourselves now in a situation where in many areas, we've achieved parity, or the threat in our competitors have achieved parity with us. Do we still maintain overmatch in many areas? Absolutely. And this is one Army that you do not want to mess with. But there are those issues out there where parity is crept in, especially when you take a look at the amount of cyber espionage that has been taking place with respect to some of our competitors and the ability for them to steal industry secrets, to steal intellectual property, and be able to use that to gain a competitive edge over us. And so these are things that we've worried about. That's why the senior leadership of the Army said, look, readiness still remains number 1, but now that Congress has helped us out with a little bit of extra funding in terms of the last couple years with respect to the overall budgets, we've been able to increase the amount of money used in our modernization accounts, and through a very thorough process of examining the money that we do have and moving that money around in our budget. We went through the series of night court to move money from programs that were not giving us the lethal advantage that we needed into those that did. And because of that self-look, that retrospect that we did, we've been able to put ourselves in a position where modernization will soon, and by 22, surpass that of readiness in terms of our priorities.
Very good. Very good. How about further on the modernization theme? Honorable Ryan McCarthy recently approved Army strategy for directed energy weapons, or lasers. We've been reading about Army S&T efforts in this area for some time. When will we see directed energy weapons systems in the field, do you think?
Yeah, the first time you're going to see that is in 22. And what we've done is we focused our directed energy on air and missile defense. And what we have right now is a scenario where we will have the opportunity to bring a 50 kilowatt laser on a Stryker platform, a DVH-1 Alpha, so basically the upgraded double V-hull Stryker, for those systems into the inventory by 22. We'll have a TRL level, technology readiness level of 7 in 21. And then the intent is to field a platoon of 4 vehicles in 22. And again, the advantage of the laser, in this case, what we call the MMHEL, is that we have the ability to have an unlimited magazine when it comes to unmanned aerial systems, as well as rockets, artillery, and mortars. Where before we were shooting $100,000 missiles at $7,000 UASs, this puts us in a position where we're not spending that kind of money to do that, and we're taking those targets down in a much more rapid fashion and a much cheaper fashion. With respect to the bigger brother, if you will, of MMHEL is what we call HEL TVD, which is High Energy Laser Technology Vehicle Demonstrator, which is a 100 kilowatt laser system based on a family of medium tactical vehicle platform. And again, this is the IFPC, if you will, system that is meant to guard and provide air and missile support to our forward operating bases and so forth, and airfields. So much bigger platform. It is movable versus a Stryker, which is maneuverable. And that's the key difference in terms of the capabilities. But with this 100 kilowatt system, which we will have available at TR level 6 and 22, the intent is to work with the Navy, and we are doing that right now, in order to even increase the power of that laser system from beyond 100 kilowatts up to maybe the 250 kilowatt mark. So that will come in just a little bit later than what we call the MMHEL on the Stryker platform.
Thank you.
So bottom line, next several years, you start seeing it on the battlefield. And then there's a ton of other applications. Explosive ordnance disposal. We want to be able to put the capability on our tanks to potentially get after targets that our combat vehicles typically go after. So this is just the beginning. The rocket, artillery, mortar, and UAS is just the beginning of where we see lasers going in the future.
Great. Let me follow up with a request for some information then on hypersonics. What's the Army doing in hypersonics, and how does that complement, again, you mentioned the Navy on the lasers, how does that complement what the other services are doing in this area?
That's a great question. I will tell you that our hypersonic work began way back in 2011 and before, when we had our first shot. So in 2011, we had our first shot. 2014, we had another shot. And then in 2017, we had a third. So the Army has been at the, I would say, cusp of bringing hypersonics into the force for a long period of time. A lot of people don't know that. Where we're at now is we have a memorandum of agreement with all the services. And we are moving forward as the production, I would say, house of the common glide body for all the services. So the Army's got that mission. What we're also doing is we're going to go ahead and take the existing 50-inch stack, missile stack, basically the booster stack, and we're going to shoot 2 of those missiles for a proof of concept capability starting in 20. So second quarter 20 will be the first 50-inch shot that we're going to use. Following that, about every 6 months to 9 months, there's going to be another shot. So we're going to do 2 50-inch missile stacks, and then us and the Navy are moving to the 34.5-inch missile stack. The reason we're doing that is because that is what is compatible with the ships and subsurface craft that the Navy has. And it provides us an opportunity that with a 50-inch, that is static. We can't move it. With a 34.5, it's movable. And so based on our family of heavy tactical vehicles, we'll have a movable system on a 34.5-inch stack. We'll shoot 4 of those systems, and by 23, we'll have the first, I would say, platoon, if you will, or battery of these systems within our inventory. So that's where we're heading with hypersonics.
Got a lot on your plate.
We do, yes, ma'am.
Talking about reform,
Yeah.
okay, and this is my last question until we turn it over to the audience, so get ready. Alex will be around with a microphone to get your questions. How's the Army leveraging other transaction authority and middle tier acquisition, MTA? What are the successes that you can point to, and what are the remaining challenges?
Yeah, that's another great question. And I will tell you that, number one, the credit goes to the Hill. And I'm not saying that just because Bill Sudi is sitting in front of me, but look, here's the situation. The Army and the rest of the services have been fighting this knife fight with one hand tied behind our back, frankly, for many, many years in terms of acquisition. And the Hill saw this. The Hill saw the explosion in technology, the rapid pace of which technology is proceeding. And the Hill also saw the fact that our peer and near-peer competitors were catching up and bypassing us. And it was unacceptable to them, it's unacceptable to us. And so they put into place a lot of different reforms and gave us a lot of tools. The first thing they did is they decided to allow the services to own their programs. So they delegated that from OSD. It said, OSD, delegate those programs that are not joint down to the services by default, number one. It doesn't matter whether they're an MDAP or not, move it down. So they gave us that great tool. The second thing they did is they said, hey, look, DARPA and NASA have been able to use this tool called Other Transactional Authorities. Basically, it is a legal binding agreement that is not a contract, and we don't have to work through the whole process of the federal acquisition regulation and all of the stipulations that are associated with that. So what that did is it allowed the non-traditionals, the people that would never do business with the Army, an opportunity to do business with us for the very first time because of the ease, if you will, of the restrictions that we had put on so many companies. There's over 23 million companies in the United States. Only 5,000 do business with the Department of Defense. So we were missing out on the rest of that. Now, I'm not going to do math in public, but that's roughly 22,995,000 companies that, frankly, wouldn't do business with us. And the other transactional authorities that they gave us, that the Hill gave us, was not about just doing experimentation or prototyping. If we competitively do it, we can take that other transactional authority all the way through full rate production if we award it competitively up front. So they gave us the tool that allows us to do business the way the business does business with business. So industry's way of doing business. So that's allowed us to bring in the non-traditionals and allowed the non-traditionals, quite frankly, to pair up with the traditionals and use each one of their own, I would say, capabilities. Some of the non-traditionals have new innovative technologies. The traditionals are ability to use that joint venture capital capability that they have and production houses that they have in order to help out a small company achieve what they want to in terms of overall production. So what a great tool that's been. And then you add in there mid-tier acquisition. The ability for us to be able to do the experimentation necessary for us to be able to inform a requirement as opposed to writing a requirement and then not being able to achieve it and having failed programs throughout the services. That's the way we've been doing business. With mid-tier acquisition, what it allows us to do is not have a JSIDS-based requirement document, but instead experiment, learn and understand and inform the requirement, then write the requirement when the time comes. It also allows us to tailor 5,000, DoD 5,000, which is the law of the land with respect to doing acquisition. So it allows us to be able to work around that whole system. So those two tools have been absolutely instrumental in the transformation of where the Army is going in terms of modernization. You said an example, IVAS, the Integrated Visual Augmentation System, basically a halo capability, if you will, for those of you that are gamers, that have the ability to bring up a heads-up display for a soldier, a pair of goggles, if you will, not the traditional night vision goggles, but literally the sand type goggles right now, and the intent is to get that to the Oakleys, if you will. But the point is ability to bring I squared, image intensifying, as well as thermal, both digitally fused, on top of having full situational awareness from your Net Warrior device on a heads-up display at all times. And in addition, bring in the synthetic training environment, so gaming right here on your own set of goggles. Now, we would have never been able to achieve that, in my personal estimation, through the normal FAR-based system. But because we went through an OTA process, folks like Microsoft and other non-traditionals competed for this particular contract. And at the end, Microsoft won, and to the shock of many. And we've been iterating with Microsoft now through their extremely developmental software pace that they have and the sprints that we've been doing. And we're going to bring that capability on by 21. And so that's one example of where we're at with respect to that. If you talk about mid-tier acquisition, many of our combat vehicles, so mobile protected firepower, next generation combat vehicle, optionally manned vehicle, using mid-tier in order to inform the requirement. You take a look at FARA, the Fast Attack Reconnaissance Aircraft, another mid-tier acquisition where we're able to use that particular tool in order to get after a non-traditional approach of bringing in next generation set of helicopters into the Army. Long answer to your question.
No, that's exactly what we wanted to hear. And sir, the AUSA staff has asked if we can get some of those goggles as well.
Great.
All right, do we have questions from the audience?
Okay, so while the audience thinks of some tough questions, if you don't mind, sir, I'll kick things off. You are also the director of the Army Acquisition Corps, as many folks in the room know. What is the toughest part of your job? And with the focus on talent management, what changes are being implemented?
Yeah, I would tell you that the toughest part of my job is changing culture. And as a leader, you know and understand that the hardest thing you do as a leader is try to change culture in an organization. And we've been an organization that has been fueled through many, many tens upon tens, decades of years on a process-based acquisition scenario, frankly. And we simply know that we can't do that anymore. We talked about earlier how the threat has caught up with us and how they don't have to pay attention to the things that we do with respect to all the rules and regulations. You don't think the Chinese or the Russians for a second care about the FAR or care about DoD 5000 or care about competition. It's not in their bailiwick, and that's not on their radar screen. So when you try to come in and you try to implement these great tools that have been given to us by the Hill, trying to change a culture that has been based on process as opposed to product, and trying to allow people to feel empowered and make them empowered and get them used to being empowered, and having them change the way that they do business, not having to ask Mother May I at every turn, but the ability to execute. And the key thing being making things, getting things to soldiers. It's about delivery. And so that's been the hardest thing. It's just, you can't do that overnight. It takes a lot of time and effort, leadership involvement, and quite frankly, it takes the grassroots that are within the organization to implement it and begin to push those that don't want to make change out of the system. And so it's been a struggle trying to get after that piece, but we're getting after it. And then some of the changes I've made with respect to talent management. One of the things that I implemented, and it's taken the last year or so to do, is that as we bring our young captains who have just been through company command and we assess them into the acquisition corps, we didn't assess them all the same. Some of them went to program offices, some of them went to training, some of them went to education. Education being a master's degree along with the acquisition training as well. And I put a stop to that. I said, look, everybody needs to go do the same thing in terms of getting that education piece, because when they come into a program management office, I need them to be on the ground running from day one, just like we do with any other specialty within the Army. We train you first, and then we send you to the unit. Why should it be any different in the acquisition corps? So bottom line is that through help from Congress and DIWE and other things, we've been able to work a program now where all of our sessions are getting that fully funded master's degree along with the acquisition training they need so that when they hit the ground running in a program office or in a contracting office, they're ready to go. This is just one example.
Great. Thank you, sir.
We do have a question.
Yeah, sir.
General Ostrowski.
This is not going to be good.
First, loved your comments. Lots of confidence in the system. I would note, Pat, that you said deferred acquisition. I'd say some of that was failed acquisition. So, given the stand-up of Futures Command and the drive for modernization in the Army, all good, how do you make that link up between the acquisition outside of Futures Command and Futures Command, not just within the CFTs, where there's at least some built-in linkage, but across the acquisition force, because there's other things that you have to buy that are not inside that CFTs, the futures that certainly be interested in.
Yes, sir. That's a great question because of the fact that there are a lot of other efforts out there. I mean, if you take a look at what the CFTs are doing, we say 31 programs, but there's a lot of other things underneath that. And the whole idea with the Stand Up of the Futures Command and the cross-functional teams was to ensure that we didn't encounter that valley of death that happens all too often as we try to take things from the science and technology community and the research and development community and move them into the actual acquisition process. So there's a ton of things that are out there that are beyond that, as you already know. So the key there is that we have to be able to take the normal programs, the rest of the story, if you will. And just because we don't have a general officer in charge of other, quote unquote, CFTs, if you will, other teams, the concept is what we're after. We want to spread that concept throughout the entire force. What do I mean by that? The fact that we have testers, logisticians, contracting officers, program managers, budgeteers, and others, and to include industry, involved in developing good requirements that are actually achievable. That concept doesn't have to just reside with the CFT. That concept should reside everywhere in our Army. And it's about changing that culture. So when the rest of the story, when the next generation truck, which will certainly not be part of the 31 programs that Army Futures Command directly drives, no pun intended, but when that next generation truck comes online, we want to make sure that that culture of cross-functional team culture is replicated, not on a formal but necessary basis, but certainly replicated throughout the rest of the Army. That's just one example, sir. The point is that we've got to take those lessons that we've learned and spread that to the rest of the Army. But you're right. The fact that the Futures Command is focusing on the 31 plus others, there's everything else out there. And what we don't want to have is this culture of theys and the theys not. And so what we have to do is make sure that everybody knows that the other programs are just as important to the Army in terms of the CS and CSS, the combat support and combat service support, for instance. Very important. So thank you, sir.
Sir, we have another question right here.
Yep. Sure.
General, you mentioned a concern about intellectual property, theft of intellectual property, and you also discussed the industry and experimentation. How is the Army going about ensuring that during that experimentation phase, before we really let a contract to a specific vendor, we're still testing that those intellectual property or we'll call it information security is imposed? Do we have contracts or other rules as to those companies that may not be as protected as, let's say, the Pentagon or the Army system?
And I will tell you that we're all vulnerable. Okay, and my stuff's out there. The Chinese have already broken into my stuff. The personnel system's been broken into. I mean, we're not perfect in the Army, and General Barrier, who's shaking his head up and down right now, can go off in great detail and tell you just how bad we've been breached, but he won't today. I'll save him that. The point is that this is something that has risen to the top of the concern list, not only within the Army, but within OSD. And there is a team now, and Tiger team, if you will, that's been set up by the Deputy Secretary of Defense and the Acting Deputy Secretary of Defense right now, that has been put together to get after how are we going to ensure that from an intellectual property perspective that we are doing everything that we possibly can to stop that cyber espionage. And I will tell you that there are no easy solutions. There are certain things that, number one, we already put in contracts the fact that they have to be cyber secure. All right, well, what does that mean and who enforces it? Well, it doesn't really mean a whole lot and nobody's enforcing it, okay, with respect to industry. Again, they're just as vulnerable as we are on our side, and we're all vulnerable. So what we have to do is, I think in my mind, we have to start getting after this in a revolutionary way. There's going to be certain things besides our special access programs, but other things that are in more of the realm of the secret, that we're going to have to make the decision as an Army and as a Department of Defense that we are willing to invest in that particular company. If we award you a contract, that we are going to be willing to invest as necessary in the right amount of infrastructure, i.e. systems, IT systems, for your company that are completely off the net. Now, that's not going to stop a inside threat, as you will, because they can download stuff, and that's going to potentially happen. But what we have to do, if you're on the net right now, you're vulnerable. I don't care whether you're an industry partner or whether you're the Department of Defense or any other department. Because from a novice, yeah, we got you covered. From an intermediate, we probably have you covered. But if you're a state actor, okay, your ability to tap into stuff is probably pretty extensive when it comes to our vulnerabilities. And the only way we're going to prevent that, frankly, from an outside attack, I can't do anything about the inside, but from an outside attack, is get you off the net. And we may be putting ourselves in a position where we're going to have to invest in companies and allow that to happen. So that's just one way I'm looking at it. General Barry's got 1,000 other, I would say, ideas as well. But you can certainly get with him after this and ask him what's up his sleeve.
Sir, I
Scott,
think we
I
have.
say yes for that.
I think we have.
Matt Bainhart from Defense Daily. A big theme on the Hill over the last couple of months with NDAA talk and budget talk is just the push to increase investment in modernization to match what peer competitors like China and Russia are doing as they kind of advance towards emerging and advanced capabilities. So I was wondering, across the 6 priorities, do you see that there's enough flexibility there and built-in pace in order to either match or outmatch competitors? Like we've seen the tactical network move to 2-year capability drops. Is there kind of that flexibility in there? And what are the challenges in meeting that current pace?
Yeah, I would tell you that I think that the leadership of the Army has made it very clear, based on their actions and their personal involvement, that they're going to get after this and that we have room. And we've not just gone back to the Hill and asked for another $5 billion a year throughout the POM in order to get after this thing. We've gone internally and we've reshuffled the deck with respect to our funding and canceled 93 programs and curtailed 93 others in order to give ourselves the resources necessary to do that. And the Hill, the SACD has not marked yet, so I can't speak for that, but the Hill has supported us. And they supported us because they knew that we were doing the right thing. We were going after the peer competitors, and we're just like the NDS has asked us to do. And so the logic that we took and did with respect to our senior leaders was flawless in this particular area. So I think that we have the resources now, and we have the resources in the right places, because before our programs, we peanut butter spread money across the entire portfolio. But with this hard look that we did, the night court that we held, if it didn't have anything to do with lethality, it was suspect to being canceled or curtailed. And that's exactly what happened. So we now, in my estimation, we are well funded to the point where we need to be in order to turn the tide of getting after modernization full time. Now, what we're going to need is predictable, sustained funding here on out. We know that last year, 19, which is actually this year, but in budget years, it's the current year. We asked for about $182 billion with a B, across the portfolio within the Army. This year, we asked for $182.2 billion. We know that we can't count on a flat line or increase every single year. It's just not going to happen, most likely. We're very concerned about a downturn. And if that downturn happens in terms of our funding, then the modernization piece is going to be put at risk. That being said, we have a commitment by our senior leaders within the Army that if that downturn does occur, that the prioritized list within the Army, i.e., the modernization efforts that we're getting after, will be funded fully, no matter what. That's been the commitment. And we're not coming off of that, because they are the priorities of our Army. And they are the most important things that the NDS asked us to do, and so we're going to continue to get after that no matter what. It's a great question.
Good morning, General. Nigel Sutton, General Motors Defense. I want to ask a question and pull the string a little bit on the directed energy sort of strategy and roadmap.
Sure.
As your lethality requirements going up to 250 kilowatt, I think I heard that, and that roadmap as you proceed there, is on that roadmap anything being addressed on your power density and energy source requirements to support that? Because as you know, you go higher, you're gonna need a higher energy, more efficient energy, and a power density.
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, the issue that you run into is it's not just the ability to create the energy to fire the laser, but it's also to dissipate the heat. And so you've got that physics problem going on a continual basis. What we've done is we've said, let's take advantage. We put a 3-star general in charge of our rapid capabilities office, if you will, General Thorogood, to not only run the hypersonics piece, but also to corral the high energy laser piece throughout the services. So what he's done is a in-depth look across the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, and others. What are people doing with high-energy lasers? What are people doing with high-powered microwave technologies? And what is DARPA doing? And how much of that is being duplicative work that if we combined our efforts, that we could do it cheaper and we could do it faster and take advantage of what we've learned from one another. And that's exactly what we've done. So the HEL TVD, the High Energy Laser Technology Vehicle Demonstrator, we're going to move forward with that. Okay? But because we looked into what the Navy was doing and what the Air Force was doing and what DARPA was doing, we found a partner within the Navy that is working on a 250 kilowatt capability that they believe, and that General Thorogood believes, that the power source for that could be potentially in the future placed in a family of medium tactical vehicles and fit within that architecture and actually work. We're not banking on that completely, but we're not going to ignore what the Navy's done. And so it's been a dual track ever since he found that out and did his homework. And so that's kind of the road we're walking down. But you're absolutely right. The power piece is extremely important. If you don't have the power, you don't have that unlimited magazine. And that unlimited magazine makes a difference in a swarm environment where you have multiple targets and you have to be able to, number one, recharge quickly and be able to shoot them all down, right? And so that's what that energy piece, that's what the role that it plays along with the heat dissipation. So great question. Thank you.
Sir, if it's okay, I'll take the last question.
Sure.
I have a 3-year-old son who, like clockwork, every night wakes me up at 3 o'clock. What wakes you up at night? What keeps you up?
Wow. A lot of things. But I will tell you that the one thing that keeps me awake is that I was late to the game once. And, of course, all of us have been late to the game a lot of times. But years ago, when I was down at Special Operations Command, the IED showed its ugly face on the battlefield. And my role, my responsibility was, as a program manager, was to get after a counter to those IEDs. And what we came up with, again, leveraging the Navy and all the work that they did, was some counter IED devices, jammers, if you will, commonly known as jammers. And we worked with a company, and within a very short period of time, we began the process of fielding those parallel to what the Army was doing with the Thor device, with their devices that they had. And in the process of doing that, I was late to the game. And one of the soldiers that I had under me as a platoon leader way back in the old guard days had became a special operator in Iraq. And his name was Sergeant Hornbeck. And I pulled into the FOB there at Mosul, into the Special Operations Cantonment area, and I saw a plaque with Camp Hornbeck on there. And I failed him because I failed to get the capability that he needed in the time that he needed, and that could have spared his life. And so I'm concerned that we're not moving as fast as we need to stop other Sergeant Hornbecks from making the ultimate sacrifice. And that's the piece that concerns me. Now, leadership of the Army shares that. They take a look at their operational risk. And their operational risk is, am I going to lose soldiers? And then they compare that to the programmatic risk as to whether or not this program's got risk areas and maybe the technology's not quite ready and so forth. And they look at me all the time and say, Paul, your program risk is interesting to me, but my operational risk is the most important. So I don't want it in 25. You figure out how to get it in 22. They've got the right attitude. We can't be late. No more Sergeant Hornbecks. Thanks for the question.
Sir, thank you. Let's give General Ostrowski a big round of applause.